if that's any consolation.
I got that quote.
We got that going.
That's hard to do, man. It's gonna be hard to drive away from there.
Yeah, so I won't be here Monday night. But, have fun with the animal show and stuff. So.
We don't have Mark. I just texted him, so I don't know. But it's 12, so we can get started.
Pete, you ready?
I'm ready.
We're good. Tom, you ready?
I'm ready. Short meeting.
He can join.
Yeah.
All right,
I'm
so I
sure he'll
will,
come
so
one
I will
day.
still ask, oh, so it's out there. This is Charles's, the other. You guys all ready? Stephanie, you good? Charles, you ready? Chiefs is? SC Lloyd, you ready? All right. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. We're a little tick after afternoon, but we're not sure if Dr. Reed is going to be joining us or not, but we've got a quorum, so we'll go ahead and get started. I want to call the August 2nd, geez, it's August already. August 2nd, 2022 Public Services Committee to order. Obviously, you know who's here for recording purposes. Again, just you guys, everybody knows the rules. Just if you have your devices with you today, just try to mute them or shut them off or silence them during the meeting if you would. If you do come up and talk to the committee, just identify who you are. Be happy to take one of the seats up here at the table if you would. As you all know, I don't think I have to belabor this, but only topics that are on the agenda for the committees is what will be talked about today. So we do have, looks like we do have 3 items. And I'll just ask the same of the folks available with us online today, just if you would be kind enough again, just to mute yourselves when you're not talking. But to use the raise hand function, so Jennifer is aware if you do have some comment that we need to be aware of, and let the record show that Dr. Rennie is here as well, so we have a full group. Let him sit down and get settled. We're just starting. First item. So with that, Madam Clerk, first item, please.
Number 9, ordinance 3rd reading, amending various sections of chapter 13.12 sewer system of title 13 public services of the municipal code of the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming to allow for exceptions to sewage disposal requirements.
Mr. Bloom.
Chair, members of the committee, Charles Bloom, Planning Development Director. At the last Public Services Committee meeting, there's some discussion regarding outhouses, septic tanks, or outhouses and cesspools, and those having the ability to be granted an exception to an abatement requirement. I had the opportunity to talk to Roy Kroger with County Health since that time, and he had indicated to me that at present, outhouses and cesspools, regardless of being in the city or in the county, are prohibited. In the event that a property was determined to have one at any time, whether that's by neighbor complaint or by just acknowledgement at the time of annexation, the county health department, city county health, would require that those be removed immediately. So those are not permitted today, and they are not going to be permitted tomorrow. The intent of the proposed amendment in section 13.12.40, that was for the exception specifically for septic tanks. So that was the follow-up that I wanted to provide to you all regarding it. Other than that, there have been no other changes or comments regarding this proposed ordinance amendment.
Questions from the committee for Mr. Bloom regarding his staff report on this item?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Laybourne, please.
so does that mean that language is going to
outhouses and septic tanks are not going to be in this renewal of the ordinance.
Mr. Bloom, go ahead.
Chair through to Councilman Mayborn, they will remain in the ordinance. This is the present wording right now where they are today. So they'll still be there in the ordinance. If we wish to make an amendment to clarify that outhouses and cesspools are not eligible for an abatement exception, that could be added into the wording. But at this time, according to county health, those are not lawfully able to exist. So there should be no occurrence to ever have to grant an exception.
Thank you.
No, go ahead if you had additional. I just wanted to let you
Well,
finish.
thank you,
before-
Mr. Chairman. I'm just pondering why you would have language like that in the ordinance when is it valid?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that's,
maybe if I read the language, all outhouses, septic tanks, cesspools, and all means of sewage disposal other than the city sewer system are declared to be a nuisance, endangering the peace, health, and lives of inhabitants of the city and must be abated. So we're not allowing cesspools or outhouses. The language requiring them to be removed stays with the ordinance. My understanding.
Mr. Chairman.
yes, go ahead.
But that's our existing language, but my understanding was that the amendment that is in red would allow us to approve an exception to that. And so if we, I guess my question for Mr. Bloom or perhaps Attorney Boster is that if we approve the ordinance with 13.12.040 with the red line language, it still doesn't matter that we can approve an exception because county health regulations won't allow it regardless. It seems like we would be in conflict with the regulations if we were to approve an exception and county regulations would overrule our ordinance. Is that what you were told by Mr. Kroger?
Go ahead.
Chair through you to Councilman Rennie, that is correct.
Because I brought this up after the last meeting and I wanted to remove the language. I didn't see why we should have ever allowed an exception for an outhouse. And I didn't want to allow an exception for lagoons or cesspools, except that in talking to the mayor, there was if we were to annex a commercial property that had a lagoon in existence, he maybe was interested in making an exception for that. But according to Mr. Kroger, there are no exceptions for existing lagoons in the city limits. Is that right?
Go ahead.
Chair through you to Councilman Rennie, that is correct. In follow up with Mr. Kroger, the city county health regulations do not allow that countywide. So the ability to grant an exception by the city would be in direct conflict with the city county regulations.
So currently all construction in the county is septic tanks.
Correct.
And there are no grandfathered cesspool lagoons.
I can think of one
That's what I know. That's what,
right on the west side of town, a big one. For a hotel.
Chair, I can get some additional information from Roy
would you
Kroger.
please?
Yeah, he had indicated that those weren't permitted and I can get some follow-up information prior to the
Do you know
next
which one I'm
meeting.
talking about?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm
I would
actually
like-
not aware which one you're referring to.
That's a
Little-
golf course
little-
attached to it.
Oh,
And,
oh, that one.
and
No, it's definitely a lagoon. Yeah,
Chair,
okay. Yes, sir.
Chair, and I'd be amenable to a 2-week postponement if you want us to provide some additional research.
I would like an answer to that.
Yeah, I don't know how they can ban it countywide. If there's a big commercial one
Yeah.
2 miles from here.
All right, well, I may move to postpone when we get to the discussion portion.
If staff would be amenable to that, Mr. Bloom.
Definitely.
Are there any further questions for Mr. Bloom from the committee before I go to public comment? Is there any public comment here within the room or online?
I don't see any hands raised online.
At this time, the chair would entertain a motion on this ordinance on third reading.
So moved.
Second,
Moved and seconded.
Mr. Chairman,
I guess, Dr. Rennie,
I'd like to postpone for 2 weeks.
Second.
postpone, second. Any further discussion from the committee on the motion to postpone for 2 weeks? All right. I'll go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor of postponing discussion of this ordinance for 2 weeks? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, the recommendation for next Monday's city council meeting will be for a 2-week postponement of this ordinance on third reading.
Still gonna try to amend outhouses out of there.
Mr. Bloom, we do appreciate you trying to do a little bit additional research on that and getting some clarification from Roy and those folks and just see what we need to do with that. So we appreciate you being willing to do that. Next item, please.
Number 11, ordinance second reading, amending chapter 1.16 annexation and infrastructure improvements of Title I general provisions of the municipal code of the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming to repeal annexation provisions, amend definitions, and modify processes.
Processes.
Sometimes these things get in my way.
We'll let it go today. Mr. Bloom.
Ontario Committee, Charles Bloom, Planning and Development Director. This is loosely related to the previous ordinance. This is in regard to annexation, specifically the County Pockets annexation. And what we've done here are 2 things. Number one, in Title I Municipal Code, we've deleted 2 sections, which is one is section 11620 and the other one is 11630, for the purpose of removing these additional specific requirements regarding annexation. Some of those requirements are ones for a geotechnical report. Some other ones are just mirroring the language that are in state statute. Within the Unified Development Code in Article 2, it already indicates that if you're annexing, you're going to follow the steps of state statute. So really there's a duplication of verbiage here, and there's also a little bit of additional requirement that is a little premature at the time of annexation. So those 2 sections are being deleted. Likewise, in the section there, they have another discussion regarding the 201 study area, where it talks about the annexation of septic systems and all of those items, which are better addressed in the other amendment, which is in Title 13. Regarding the remainder of the amendments, a lot of those are focused on when reimbursement and when public improvements is required. Right now, we have a whole bunch of agreements, and these agreements have been recorded against specific properties for infrastructure reimbursement. Those infrastructure reimbursement agreements all point to section 1, chapter 116 of code. And they say, if you're subject to an infrastructure reimbursement and you're doing an annexation on your own initiative, if you are connecting to water, if you're connecting to sewer, then you're required to reimburse the person who may have put that utility in front of your house or that street in front of your house. Those are already scenarios that have already happened. We cannot change that agreement because it was put in place up to 20 years ago. For all new developments or new properties that are annexed, that wish to connect to water or sewer that are not subject to a reimbursement agreement where someone else developed the road, this second new definition would be in place. Essentially, what that means is if you are to connect your sewer system of your house to a city service, you would not automatically have to bring the road up to city standards. You wouldn't have to pave with curb, gutter, sidewalk, pavement. You wouldn't have to do that. That would be triggered at the time when one would either subdivide the property or they develop it with a use like a multifamily development or commercial use that would trigger roadway improvements. That is the intent of the new definitions. I should note that if the city annexes a property under this new definition, it does not require that the property owners immediately construct all the roads to city standards. Also in this ordinance, we have modified the definition of infrastructure improvements. This was developed in conjunction with Tom Cobb, the city engineer. We have pulled these definitions out of the text within section 11640, because in section 11640 of the municipal code, that was essentially a definition that was in a section that should have been moved in the definition section. So we relocated that there, and we made a small addition by adding number 7, which is for traffic control devices, street lighting, park facilities, any landscaping required by the city. That was not defined as infrastructure previously, so we've added that as infrastructure under the new definition of infrastructure. Because as you're aware, infrastructure now is not just curb, gutter, and sidewalk and utilities. It also can involve park facilities, greenway, trails, traffic signals, those types of items. Regarding other amendments in this this section, we've raised our fee that would be an application fee for anyone wishing to file for a reimbursement. Right now, the fee in municipal code is $500. These reimbursement agreements, once they are completed and executed and recorded on a property, city staff has to monitor these for 20 years. So we've increased that from $500 to $2,000. Just a little bit more of a fee to offset some of the anticipated costs with these agreements. Secondly, under the current regulations, if one develops infrastructure and wishes to seek reimbursement in the future, right now there is a 3-month window in which they have to file that reimbursement request with the city. We have increased that to a 180-day window to give developers and the engineering firms a little bit more time to get their ducks in a row to file those reimbursement requests. And again, this request, it comes after the city accepts a public project. So once a roadway is built and inspected and accepted for city maintenance, we're increasing it to a 180-day period for them to start the reimbursement process. So regarding the remainder of this item of this amendment, we have essentially made a few modifications to reflect the current processes for when developments are required to provide public improvements. And we've clarified that the reimbursement process is not just applicable to subdivisions, but also to development. So if there is a large development that is occurring on land that has been previously subdivided and they are required to build public improvements, then they would also be eligible for that reimbursement agreement ability. So with that, I hope I have adequately explained that. to you all, but I'm open for any questions you may have.
The chair does have a question, but I'll ask the rest of the committee first before I ask mine. Are there any questions? That's a lot of information, so I would anticipate maybe some questions. Do any members of the committee have any questions from Mr. Bloom based on their staff report?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Dr. Reed.
So 16.040 offsite improvements, everything section B got moved to definitions.
Chair, through you, that is correct.
Okay. Okay, and then going to backing up the page, so all the modifications 16.020 and 030 were all requirements that we're not necessarily going to require.
Chair, through you, that is correct. Those are additional requirements for annexation that we are not going to require. Frequently, those requirements are waived prior to an annexation being submitted.
So I know some of them are like soil testing requirements. The city engineer doesn't think those are necessary.
Correct.
Okay. And then in 020 with B, there was a reference to the 201 agreement. And it's kind of hard to read that area with the strikeouts. So it's just saying that essentially what B said was we could defer installation of sewer services by removing that, or I mean, we're no longer deferring those, or we're just doing that somewhere else.
In subsection B, it read, in the case of county property within the 201 study area, the city may permit the owner to defer the required offsite improvements of this chapter until the city installs the improvements, or the city engineer notifies the owner that the improvements must be completed. Installation of sewer services may not be deferred. If the city agrees to defer installation of offsite improvements, the city and owner will enter into a binding agreement. So this is actually addressed in the previous amendment in Title 13, where for a city initiated annexation, they would be able to have that exception granted. So they wouldn't have to ask for a deferral. It would be a deferral that would be at the time of annexation. In the event it is an annexation that is to be applied for and initiated by the landowner, at that time, the city would review this through our internal policies regarding the connection and the improvements. So it wouldn't necessarily need to be in our ordinance.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
But really the issue here is that the city initiated annexation. I mean, that's why
Right.
we're even discussing this. So I understand if the landowner was going to initiate annexation, most of the requirements would apply to that. But in view of the fact that the city's contemplating initiating annexation, the granting of the deferral is done at the time of the annexation. Is that what you just told me?
Chair for the committee, that is
Okay.
correct.
All right. And then I guess the last question I have is on page 5 and 16.080. Reimburse, the change we're adding there is reimbursement actions initiated by the city shall be exempt from fees. Or it's just like city fees for filing, plating, whatever, or is it all fees? I mean, are they being exempt from, if we initiate annexation, our improvements, will it be adding sewer, water, curb and street and curb and gutter? Are those what's they're being exempt from, or are we still just allowing deferrals?
Chair through to the committee and Dr. Rainey. The fees that it's referencing are the fees identified in the section above in 116.070B. It is the filing fee for reimbursement agreement that is presently at $500, which is going to $2,000
50,000.
proposed.
Okay,
And the reason for that is because essentially it'd be a general fund transfer, takes staff time to process it, and it comes back right back to the general fund again.
so I guess my final question is, if we annex some of those undeveloped, not partially developed pockets, they have residences, but have not had the curb and gutter done, almost half their street done. What has always kept us from doing that in the past is that if sometimes the fees or the cost of bringing things to city standards was prohibitively costly. In some instances, it would cost as much as what the value of the residence was. So if we are going to initiate annexation, how are we going to handle those improvements?
That was going to be my question.
Chair, through to the committee, Dr. Rennie and Councilmember Cook. That's a great question. And what we are looking at is those properties would be able to exist as is, as non-conformity. They still have their gravel road. If they're on a septic system and it hasn't failed, they can continue to function as is. At the time that they wish to develop to a higher density or like a new density, subdivide their land, carve it off to go to another, to create another lot. At that time, the public improvements such as road, the street improvements, those should be required. Any utilities to connect those two lots will be required. So that is the intent. At the time that their septic system fails, they would need to coordinate with Board of Public Utilities, how that connection would be. That would require a water sewer service fee added, very likely a main extension that would also have to be placed on their property. And that, or along their property to the extent of their ownership. So that would be the case there. The other options would be a local improvement district.
Right.
Where the neighborhood would have to petition the governing body for creation of a local improvement district. And then the final option would be if the city came in with a special project to construct a road. This is presently in our current code right now, is we could build those improvements under 11680, which is the one that we're exempt from the fees, or we could build those. And then we could file for reimbursement that would last for 20 years when a property owner would develop, do that subdivision project, develop with a use that would trigger public improvements. They would then have to reimburse the city.
Mr. Chairman. But in the area, and again, I think primarily the area in question within the city is the area between Ridge and College and Pershing and Del Range. There are not that many large, most of those are single family residences. There aren't that many large parcels that are going to be subdivided in that area, are there? If you look at a map, I think they're more just.
Chair, through to Councilman Rennie, there are several, but yes, there are several very small ones. Honestly, after annexation, most of them would continue to exist as they are today.
Is there anything that triggers them with those small ones, that triggers them to have to eventually come into compliance with the rest of the city?
Chair, through you to Dr. Rennie, no.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Seagrave.
Mr. Chair, through you. So these properties may not be connected to the city system. I'm looking at the two fire chiefs over here. How are they going to put out a fire if they don't have hydrants and access to water in these, the area you described, Ridge to, et cetera?
Chair, through you, I would defer that to the fire department, but I would believe that we do have some fire systems in some of those areas. I will let them talk about their public truck.
I'm thinking about
Water
connections and why.
Chair Byron Matthews, Shine Fire Rescue. So in that specific area that we're referencing, we have city utilities that surround all of those pockets. So whether that utility is on College or Ridge, Pershing, Rollins, Bevins, all those streets up through there, we have those utilities available. So there are hydrants in that area. In the extent that we had a possibility that we had an area that didn't have a hydrant, we could call for that additional assistance. But most, my familiarity with that area is everything there has a hydrant available within a reasonable reach, meaning 400 to 800 feet.
And we have that much hose and that type of thing.
Yes, sir.
needed.
Mr. Chair.
But to
Yes, sir.
follow that up, Tom, are there areas that we're contemplating looking at or be close in that do not have?
Chair, through you to Dr. Rennie. Really the county pockets, what we're looking at for this first round of county pocket annexations is everything that is 100% surrounded. These are all areas that have the infrastructure around them. There's areas south of Gardenia, there's like 9 lots there. There's fire service nearby. I don't think there's water line in that area, but there's pretty close. We do have a lot of properties between Ridge and College in that location where Byron had just answered that. And there are a lot that are located north of Del Range that are surrounded by existing development. There are areas that are not proposed to be included in the county pocket annexation where water service is quite far. Those are areas like north of Pershing and to the west of Whitney. That area right now, that is not in a county pocket, so it's not a focus of the county pocket annexations. I can get you all a map of the county pockets so you'll have more familiarity with where those are.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
as we proceed with these proposed annexations, I think it's really important that fire be involved and know what they're dealing with. And, you know, it's going to become our responsibility to provide those services. So
Well, and I would also suggest CPD as well.
yeah, they're not tied to a
Well,
water line as much.
but I mean, generally speaking, we're talking about a new area. I would assume that, you know, they're not necessarily already. necessarily completely. So, but yeah, I mean, it would definitely be fire people. For sure. Any further questions for Mr. Seagrave or Mr. Laybourne or Dr. Rennie? No, thank you. I don't see any here in the room. Jennifer, do we have any public comment from anyone online?
I don't see any.
Okay, with that, the chair would entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second. There's a motion and a second on this, to adopt this ordinance on second reading. Any further conversation, questions from the committee? Dr. Rennie.
When I first got on council years ago and the discussion of county pockets was made, I thought, well, the city just needs to go and fix that up and take care of it. And a couple of people sat me down and explained to me, said, no, that's not fair to us that have been in the city for years. We all, whether we developed our home or bought it from a developer who paid those costs, somewhere along the line, we paid for the costs of sewer, water, and street, curb, and alley. And so we've all paid for those. And it's never, and so it's really not fair for us, for the city to go and do it for other people. I'm kind of held by that position because I think that's accurate and that's true. At times when during fifth penny discussion, I never got very far, but I suggested we build a fund in the fifth or sixth penny to do those improvements. And my thought was that if the voters voted to pay for those for somebody else, then I could go with that. But the question comes down to looking at the area, specifically the area I referenced. I mean, it's gonna remain unchanged whether we pass this or not. And I guess then the question becomes in my mind, which have to sort out, well, do I want it unchanged within the county? Or do I want it unchanged within the city? So that at least emergency services are sorted out, and probably a little safer now. But I still would have an issue if the end result was that the city would wind up paying for those improvements, or the taxpayers would wind up paying for those improvements. So I guess if I can be assured that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I have a concern too, Rex. I mean, bottom line, taking those, it would appear to me anyway, taking those areas, into the city and under your purview. I mean, I don't know, I don't think as you sit here, chief, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot and ask, how many calls, go to that area, or we can anticipate, but I mean, it is going to have an impact at some point on your budget. So, yeah, I mean, is the benefit of increasing the tax base going to offset the potential impact to our first responders? We're just going to create further burden on our already stretched resources.
Mr. Chair. While the revenue may not offset what the cost of services are, it's the right thing to do for those folks in that area of the community. It's a better response. It's a more well-equipped response in those areas. And we're protecting those other folks that have already been annexed or developed into the city. So we're protecting this piece that may adjoin to that piece. So at the end of the day, it's a better solution for everyone involved.
And I appreciate that answer. It's just, you also too, though, know that, I mean, we do have those conversations. I mean, that is a consideration. But no, I appreciate your response to that.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
2 quick things. I think these properties, as their septic systems fail, that will be the trigger that requires them to either abandon the property or connect to services. I mean, that's the final hammer, because they cannot replace the septic under the 201. And the other thing, I think the benefit, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it was my understanding that when Sarge's caught fire on Ridge Road not too long ago, city police were blocking the road, waiting for county fire to come and put the fire out. And those are the situations I think of that can get out of control
Quick.
and that don't need to if we do this. So it's certainly not going to be perfect, and it's going to take a long time for those septic systems to fail and require people to come in, but that will be the hammer, I think, at some point.
As soon as we have a motion and a second, are there any further questions or comments from the committee before we ask for a vote? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of approving this ordinance on second reading?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? The recommendation of the Public Services Committee at next Monday's City Council meeting will be for approval of this ordinance on second reading. And that's it for the regular agenda, but we do, as requested by Planning and Development Office, we do have one item under other items of the agenda. Or, yeah, I'll go ahead and let you read. Yeah.
Memorandum of understanding between the city of Cheyenne and Cal Kunkel of Cheyenne Fox Farm LLC to authorize filing of planning applications for city-owned lands for the purposes of vacating and replatting Waterford Square second filing.
Mr. Bloom.
Chair, first of all, Charles Bloom, Planning and Development Director. Thank you all for your consideration on this item. This essentially is an MOU for the purpose of allowing a developer to replat Waterford Square. Waterford Square is development that was initially 2013, 2014. It was subsequently platted in 2015. Since that time, it hasn't moved forward. There are utility issues, there's development issues, and it's became a project that was dormant and dead. So we've had a new developer who has come in and they have filed for a replat to vacate the streets within and create a multifamily development with residential units. As part of that, they are taking the platted roads and rights of way that are within there and turning them into privately maintained streets. Since the city is the owner of a lot that is adjacent to the private or the public right of way, Waterford Square, as well as a public right of way called Traymore Avenue, which is the northerly southerly one on the west side of the lot, we are required under state statute to sign off on the plat and also sign off on the vacation of the roads as a plat moves forward. The reason I'm asking for this to be introduced today is because this has been through staff review for several months now. It's had discussion by the planning commission and it's been postponed by the planning commission. So projects have already seen some other delays. So since this was a staff oversight that we needed to sign off on the vacation of the right of way, I'm asking for this MOU to be approved so we can move forward with the development application. I would like to note that all of these rights of way did come from the parent parcel back in 2015, and the city did receive what is lot 1, block 11. That was deeded to the city as part of a subdivision for parkland. With that subdivision, we had a park development agreement. Those park fees in that park development agreement, those have been paid in full by this new developer. They've caught up and paid all fees related to that development, as well as the collection fees that were associated with it in the past. So I'm asking for the governing body. Oh, and I should note that this development does propose incorporation of that open space and the design elements of its development in this development. I'm open for any questions that you may have regarding this MOU.
Are there any questions
Mr. Chair,
from the committee for Mr. Bloom, Mr. Seagrave?
through you. I have no problem with the MOU. I understand where you're at, but I think I heard you say they are not going to dedicate the streets to the city. That's fairly unusual, isn't it? That they would be privately maintained.
Chair, through you to Councilmember Seagrave, that is correct. These will be private streets with easements, and they will essentially be in the same location as where Waterford Boulevard is, but they have larger lots that will be proposed, which will have internal circulation, similar to what you would see in a parking lot or a development where they're privately maintained access points. So we do have a lot of multifamily developments in the community where we do have private access ways. One I'd like to point out that's probably the more recent one is the one on the southwest corner of Ridge and Story. You do have some fourplex units there where they have different lots that have private internal circulation system. Several new developments have popped up on Del Range that also have that mechanism. One that's probably the most comparable to this is the one on College and Rock Springs on the north side. It's the single story development right south of the creek, where you have single family homes, driveways, all accessing an internal access road. So that's what they're proposing. They are privately maintained, and the roadway network is required to meet fire code when it comes to access and turning radius for trucks.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Laybourne?
so why is it beneficial to the developer to have a private road?
Chair, through to Councilmember Laybourne. The reason for a private road is they can design to different specifications. So they can design to a specification that more suits their needs. It changes their driveway access points, parking, those elements, and sidewalk requirements. So they've reviewed this and they believe the privately maintained access easements and access ways are a better scenario for them. And I should note that these are required to be the Waterford Boulevard as vacated and replatted. It's required to retain a public access element. So the public will still be able to access parkland from that vacated right of way.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Legrand, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dr. Reed.
So that was gonna be my question. Are the road's gonna be built, that was my first question. The road's gonna be built to city standards.
Chair, that no, they're not supposed to be standard.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, the structural section of the West Bay Engineering, the structural section of the roadway is.
Hello,
the-
Mr. Bay, go ahead. I know that's who this is, but go ahead and identify yourself.
This is West Bay with the engineering department.
Go ahead,
The
Mr. Bay.
The structural section of the roadway is built to the city requirements, the UBC requirements, the thickness of the surfacing.
But the
It's-
width.
They veer from the right of way requirement,
And
which there's none.
will the replat go through this committee?
Chair, through to Dr. Rennie, yes, the replat will be considered by this committee at the next meeting, the next Public Services Committee.
So how does this work? Was it originally a PUD? No?
Chair, through you to Dr. Rennie, no, this was straight zoning. It was, I
That's
believe it was
what I-
HR
that's what I
and
remember.
C. Yes,
Okay, so it wasn't PUD, so we're looking at allowing a replat of what now becomes private streets that are not up to city standard. So I presume then we're doing no maintenance, we're doing no snow removal, we're doing nothing with those streets, is that where this is going?
Chair, through to the committee, that is correct. There would be no
And is-
public maintenance.
Is there an MOU to that effect? Or I mean, I just at some point, when the Lakewood community started out as a private gated community and eventually we wound up having to take care of it.
Chair, through to the committee, I can address that. The plat that's shown on this exhibit here, this is the current Waterford Square. The other subdivisions where we've ended up having to take over roads, they actually showed those roadways as rights of way, but labeled them as private. So when the courts looked at that, they said, hey, this is developed as a road, it's platted as a road, therefore it's a road, city take responsibility.
Road is a road is a road.
This proposed development proposes as 5 or 6 large lots, and it clearly states this is an access easement, this is a utility easement, and what that allows is, number one, change in roadway width, but also allows for modifications to the setback requirements within. But I'm comfortable that through this process, the city will not be automatically transferred any roadway maintenance responsibility.
Okay, and then my last question is, on the map that you provided, the green, which was supposed to be like part green space, it's noted as city property will remain as green space, and the portion we're vacating is just the red outlined area.
Chair, through the committee, that is correct, Dr. Rennie, that will remain as the city ownership.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bloom. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Bloom, am I supposing that HOA is going to maintain these roads in perpetuity?
Chair, through to Councilman Mayborn, I believe they have a property owner association that will be established. Planner 2, Seth Lloyd, will be able to address that. He's been working as a developer on the development project.
Go ahead, Mr. White.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Seth Lloyd. I'm with the City of Cheyenne Planning and Development Department. The reason I came up to discuss this item is because it's not very clear right now what's going to happen. It will become clear when the plat gets submitted to the governing body. But what's going to happen is they're going to vacate all of the streets and basically all of the lot lines that are within the Waterford Square development. So all of those streets are going away, not just the sections highlighted in red on your exhibit. The reason those sections of streets are highlighted in red on the exhibit, because those are the rights of way adjacent to the city parcel. Therefore, those are the areas that in order to vacate, the city needs to sign off on the plat. So that's the reason for this action, is so that we can vacate those portions of rights of way, while the entire Waterford Square is basically going to be vacated. The proposed plat is available to view on our planning commission agenda packet from yesterday, but it will be submitted to council this week for consideration in 2 weeks at the next Public Services Committee meeting. But it will become clear that all of Waterford Square is being vacated. So all of those streets, all of those alleys, all of those lot lines are being vacated, and it will be like under a dozen, I don't remember the exact number of lots. And these will be very large lots with access easements running through them. There won't be streets or platted as streets. I hope that helps clarify what's going on and the purpose for this MOU. But I'm also available for questions as well, if you have more questions about the specific proposal that's triggering this MOU.
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
I
Seeger.
don't want to belabor this because we're going to see it in the future, but basically these large lots are going to be for multifamily. They'll have a lot of parking. That won't be a street, but it will be parking around these large. Is that kind of what we're going to see?
So Mr. Chair, the proposed development is, by our zoning code, we consider cottage lot development. Its closest analog is the Rock Springs development that Director Bloom mentioned. If you go out to Rock Springs and College, it's kind of a neighborhood of almost townhome looking items, low to the ground. They don't look like multifamily, but they're all on one giant lot. Everyone who lives in that neighborhood is renting from one property owner. And that one property owner is also in charge of snow removal, maintenance of the access ways that go through that. They kind of look like residential streets. If you just drive them, you wouldn't necessarily know that those are private access ways on a lot, but that's what they are. And that's the what the proposed development pattern here would be as well.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee for either Mr. Bloom or Mr. Wood? Bye, Mike.
Bye.
Seeing and hearing none. Jennifer, do we have any questions from the public?
I don't know the answer.
At this time, the chair would entertain a motion on this memorandum of understanding. And I believe the action needed is a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the MOU.
We have a second, motion and a second. Any further questions or comments from the committee related to this memorandum of understanding? Okay, so you're hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Okay. The recommendation for next Monday's city council meeting, I'm assuming this is going on again for next Monday.
Well, it would not be a consent for no matter what, because it was.
Not unanimous.
Well, it wasn't, well, it also wasn't introduced at
Right.
the council meeting.
Yeah, I don't think this is going on consent anyway, honestly. All right, the recommendation for next Monday's meeting is for approval of this MOU. And with that, that's all the business we have in front of us today. This meeting's adjourned.